I really like working with light because it's a fleeting medium. It's only there when it's there. It disappears at the speed of light, literally. So with light you can create an experience that defies physics in many ways. Being a trained electrical engineer, I had a lot of foundation in place to explore these things and work with computers and work with LEDs and make it all work together and integrate social media, extracted data from different data feeds that are normally not used to create art with, but with all this stuff you can relatively easily combine those things and display it in light. So what you're thinking about was an exploration of specifically the human visual system, where we have a different way of perceiving red and blue. The red has a lot more detail, blue has less detail. So if you look at blue things, a blue light specifically, it's really difficult to focus on and you get a very sort of blurry thing. But then when you combine that with red, where we have a lot of detail, that creates an interesting combination when you show those two colors next to each other. What you're blinking about has some very subtle movements where you see certain sides of that, and then it has very fast movements where you see the blue and red kind of mixed to something that looks like green, which is strange because you would see purple. So you get a bunch of sort of after effects and after images on your retina that are not really present in the actual display, but it forms in your brain. Zoom is a collaboration with architect Stephen Christensen, and it was first shown at the A&E Museum here in Los Angeles. It was made for a show called SML-XLA. It's a riff on a book about architecture of the same name that explores different scales of architecture. We thought it might be interesting to try a different scale, which is extra small. So the idea is to show different scales of things that are tied to the same object. So you may have a shape of an object, but that object has a different shape attached to it, just like a fingerprint on your finger. On the inside, we have a light sculpture, which is this kaleidoscopic tour of different scales again. So it zooms in on a shape and it zooms back out and it turns around and it kind of explores how you perceive that shape. In the piece Voyeur, I was working with a social media feed. It's actually taken from Instagram, and it takes all the images I like on Instagram, it transforms them, it scales them down, it blows them back up to a scale that is much bigger than you would normally see it at, but it's also much less detailed than you would see it at. So in that sense it becomes a remix of what happens on Instagram. It's not something you might see on Instagram. And most people will not see what I like on Instagram. They might see my photos on Instagram, but they might not go as far as finding out what I actually like. So it's also an interesting way to expose myself. It's more intimate, I think, than posting a photo on Instagram. It's actually showing what I like on Instagram. The wave series is an interesting combination of physical constraint and then the flexibility of light. So what I've created inside the frame is different shapes that are created from pieces of sheet metal that are bent in a certain shape and then attached, and they are locked in place, they cannot be changed. Then there is a frame in front of it, and then there's a bunch of LEDs behind it, and they're capable of creating any pattern. And if you just look at it without, like separate, you see a different thing. When you layer those two things, the LEDs and the metal pieces, then you get a completely different experience because the metal pieces are now creating compartments of light, and then the actual sequence of light on the surface of the piece is created by me literally painting with my finger on my computer tablet, and that gets recorded into the piece.